And that's another way of looking at where we're at the moment in our sense of calling to sacred activism. That we each have a gift to bring to this current crisis. We're each born with this gift that the world is waiting for, unique gift, which we feel when we're connected to our source. This is where sacred activism comes in. And that we're being called to not underestimate what we're capable of doing. Just like that butterfly's wing, just a smile in the street. Tiny things can affect the outcome of the whole.
You got to accentuate the positive. Wow, I feel good. A little bit of feel good goes a long way.
You're listening to Karen Swain, teacher of deliberate creation, accentuating the positive, showing you a way to a better life.
Accentuating the positive, it's not just fad, it's sanity. Who in their right mind would accentuate anything else?
If you feel like that's what you want to do.
Hello and welcome to another show, Accentuating the Positive with Karen Swain. Always beautiful to be with you again. Well, I have another woman to introduce you to that I'm madly in love with today. I've been reading up all about Gillian, Dr. Gillian Ross. Welcome to the show. She's one of for those people listening, she put her hand up to because it's on audio as well as video platforms. But Dr. Gillian is one of the Australian speakers for the Higher Self Expo. I found you at the Yes and conference amongst a whole mess of, when I say mess, a whole group of these beautiful young spiritual teachers. And there you were, a little bit older. And I'm thinking, oh, she's hanging out with the young ones. What does this woman have to say?
Substantially older, I might add.
And I just listened to you and I'm like, oh my God, I just was so blown away by your articulate, the way you articulate and your story. And anyway, you're living outside of Sydney on country. Shall we honour that?
Absolutely, darling. Yes, I'd love to honour the ancestral custodians of this amazing land on which I feel very privileged to be living. It is adjacent to a sacred site, the Nimbin Rocks, which was an ancient initiation site. So I feel enormously privileged, but also very welcome here by the Bundjalung Nation peoples since I arrived. So that's felt really nice. Yeah.
Oh, so you're right up there near Nimbin, are you?
Ancestors of the land. Yeah.
Yeah, one of the ancestors of the land, and thank you. So you're right up the top there, right up the top of New South Wales.
Yes, northern New South Wales. Yeah, Bundjalung country. Yeah.
Such a beautiful part of the planet, honestly.
It's more the heart chakra of the planet, There's just sort of special energy in this whole area, which is the Bundjalung Nation area, actually. That whole area, yeah. We're taking in Byron Bay, of course, the famous Byron.
Yeah. Oh, I love it up there. I'm totally going to go and live up there one day. But for those people who don't know about Gillian, I'm going to read your bio and we're going to find out a little bit more about you. And your topic for the Higher Self Expo is Evolutionary Mysticism and the Emergence of the Planetary Mind. Oh my God, just the title is fantastic. Born in England in the 40s, Gillian was very much a child of the Western mind, growing up in its intellectual traditions and painfully sharing its late 20th century crisis of meaning. After a lifetime's journey embracing many different worldviews, Gillian finds it difficult to put a label on her spiritual perspective. If pressed, you say, you would describe yourself as a Christian Buddhist yogi and a mystic with a penchant for Taoism.
I wrote that a while ago, Karen. I would now say that I'm an evolutionary mystic. Rather sums it up than saying all of that. A universal mystic.
I like that, an evolutionary mystic. Perfect. Over the last 10 years, you've been happy to call yourself a spiritual evolutionary, it says here too. Your Western education gave you honours science degree, a master's degree in philosophy and a doctorate in behavioural science, hence why I asked you to speak at the Higher Self Expo, because we're marrying science and spirituality.
Beautiful.
And a doctorate in behaviour, but in your view, it left you spiritually and emotionally bereft. In your late 30s, You gave up city life and the academic career in order to give more time to your 3 young sons and pursue your deepening interest in subtle energy and mysticism. Gillian trained as a shiatsu massage practitioner as well as a yoga teacher and began to explore alternative lifestyles, studying Eastern and Western spiritual philosophies. In the early 90s, you began making relaxation and yoga tapes through the ABC and published your first book. So the ABC, for people listening and watching, is the Australian Broadcasting Commission, not the American broadcast, but much the same. It is mainstream media. So it's beautiful that you've been out there on mainstream media. I just love that, sharing your wisdom. And your first book was In Search for the Pearl, the personal exploration of science and mysticism. Your second book is There Life Before Death? Reflections on a Spiritual Awakening, also published by the ABC. And in 2010, you published Psyche Yearnings. Is that right?
Psyche's Yearning. Based on around the myth of Psyche and Eros. Yes. Psyche's
radical perspective on self-transformation. In the late 80s, you became a student of the Clair Vision School, founded in Australia by Dr. Samuel Sagan in 1987. Gillian lives on a 40-acre retreat in northern New South Wales and delights in sharing with others some of the philosophies and practices which helped you so profoundly in your journey out of spiritual bleakness and into lasting sense of peace, joy and well-being. You can find more about Dr. Gillian Ross at drgillianross.com. Amazing journey.
Well, darling, I might just, do you want to mention the fourth book called Consciousness versus Catastrophe?
Oh, I haven't got that here. Consciousness versus
Human Evolution. Consciousness versus Catastrophe. That's the one that seems to have resonated a lot with people. Reflections on the next stage of human evolution, which is more or less what I'm going to be talking about at your expo, this next stage.
Right.
Of evolution. Yeah, so the book is, you could call it an introduction to evolutionary mysticism as well.
Yeah.
It brings the reader into contact with a lot of writers and mystics, who are talking about all of this now. Yeah.
Is that the book that you discussed with Rick on his show?
Yeah. Yes.
Buddha at the Gas Pump. So Gillian was just telling me that she was chatting with Rick. How long ago was that?
Well, I thought it was just a year ago, but actually it's 2 years ago, September 2019.
Okay.
Terrifyingly quickly, especially when you're my age. I don't know.
I don't know how old you are. How old are you, Gillian?
I'm 81.
Oh, wow. I thought you were in your early 70s.
Oh, you're a darling.
Oh, wow. Yeah. Well, it's so beautiful to talk to someone with such rich history. You've seen a lot in this world. You've seen the evolution of consciousness. That's the thing. I'm speaking so often. I've been doing this for over 30 years. I've got a couple of years younger than you, but I've seen this evolution and it's so beautiful to see it. And you would have seen more of it. Do you want to go through a little bit of your journey and how you've seen the world change, what you've discovered?
Well, as I said to you earlier, I'm English, a bit inhibited about talking about yourself and your history and stuff like that. And especially, when you sort of grow out of it all and you feel, I don't even know that person anymore. But anyway, but I do tell my story in 2 of my books because I feel it resonates with people personally, but my journey and a lot of journeying people that are experiencing now resonates or aligns with the story of Western culture. Because at one time, we as a culture, and which of course is now global culture, did have a connection with the sacredness of the land, did feel that spiritual connection, did have a heart-centered connection with it all. And then, of course, we took off and institutional religion came in, Christianity came in, separated us from all of that. God is up there, not down here, and introduced heaven and hell, and all of that sort of thing. We went into a sort of transcendentalism where we had to escape from all of this and look to heaven beyond. But now we're coming back to that reconnection. And that was, and in fact, and then we moved into the modern era where so many of us are just, indifferent to religion.
Yeah.
Atheist or agnostic, just lost any sort of sense of connection, either transcendent or imminent,
Yeah, I want to interject here because when I was reading your story this morning, I really resonated with when you said that you were hanging out with intellectuals.
Yes,
and to the intellectual mind, any sort of mysticism or religion was considered it's sort of like illiterate almost. It's like you're stupid if you believe in that stuff.
Absolutely, darling, because I was at a grammar school in Lincolnshire, Northern England, and I was a big fish in a little pond, I mean, I got a big scholarship and I always did well sports-wise and intellectually and so on. But I had this really passionate interest in religion, and I felt a very intimate connection with Christ from a very early age. I used to go to church on my own. My family weren't particularly religious. I used to teach myself songs on the piano and sing them. No idea Christ was with me, And then I started to have doubts through my physics teacher, my science in my teenage years. Went to University College London, which is called the godless institution of Gower Street in London, because the psychology professor there was an atheist and the philosophy professor there was an atheist, AJS. And I hung out with postgraduate psychology students from an early time. They just made me feel that if I mentioned anything about religion or expressed any interest in Jung, never mind God, I was coming over as emotionally unstable and stupid, And as a country bumpkin, I was trying very hard to be neither of those. So, I kept my gob shut and gradually took on their way of looking at things, which was to be terribly clever and rational, And I struggled with that for another 20 years until I realized it was doing nothing for me, and and went to yoga classes, and then the world started opening up again. It was just wonderful.
You say, and I've got to say I do know, like I grew up in the eastern suburbs of Sydney where intellect is so honoured, and I remember I read the book by James Redfield. What was it called?
Oh, yes.
What was the first book? Because it kind of went a bit viral, didn't it, that book? And everyone was reading it and the mainstream media were talking about it. And a friend of mine had said that how badly written, there was so much grammar mistakes and so many spelling mistakes. And that's all she could say about the book. And I remember thinking, I didn't see any of that. I actually go into the wisdom in the book. And she was saying how badly written it was. And that's the sort of world I grew up into, just like being made stupid to believe in anything woo-woo.
Yes.
Yeah.
Isn't it interesting? And that's definitely changing. I give another lovely little anecdote. When I went out into my second journey into the outback to meditate, actually, I love the Australian outback. We're so blessed to have this pristine spiritual environment there. Not so pristine anymore, but pretty pristine if you find the right place. Anyway, I was in a tent in the middle of a national park somewhere, and these two rangers came in and were quite concerned because they thought I might be lying dead there or something. They popped their head in. I was lying semi-naked, so I was quickly coming. So, I'm here to meditate. Oh, right, okay, how nice, went off. That was in the late 90s. And just surprised me that was already quite an accepted thing to do. If you'd done that in the 70s or 80s, you'd have probably been carted off to a mental home or something. You're not safe. But so meditation has become such a buzzword, which is delightful because it wasn't, in the early 90s or 80s, or when I started in the early 80s, late 70s, not so much.
Yeah, meditation's part of the mainstream now, which is part of this evolutionary cycle that I think you're witnessing as
Exactly, darling. Our awakening, And Buddhism has been enormously valuable in that because people respect Buddhism, and mindfulness Buddhism as mindfulness meditation has really been drawn from the Buddhist tradition. I mean, I do get a bit cross, I have to say, although I'm letting go of that. How secular mindfulness meditation has become. Because what I practice is mystic meditation. Meditation to me is all about connecting with the divine, connecting with your inner divinity through the heart and through the light above. And
yes, I know a lot of people complain about people just do yoga because it's fashionable and they want to wear their yoga pants and they meditate because it's fashionable, but we've got to start somewhere.
Exactly, darling.
We've got to start somewhere, make it fashionable, make it trendy, and then let them sort of see it from that perspective. But then when they go through their life crises, they get divorced, they get sick. What does Petrea King say? Do you know Petrea King?
Sure. But I do think that the new story of evolutionary mysticism, which we may talk about in our conversation, is a new story that is bringing people more into, that mysticism that is then enriches their meditation practice. Do you see what I mean?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And
yeah.
usually they don't go there until some crisis hits their life. And when the shift hits the fan, then they sort of rely on that meditation practice or yoga practice to bring them deeper into the mystical
But
world.
also the point is, darling, the planets hit the iceberg. The planet.
I know. The shit has hit the fan.
Middle-age crisis. The shit has hit the fan, whatever expression you like to use.
Shift.
Humankind is going through its middle, because you see, I describe my conversion back to spirituality as being my midlife crisis, really.
Mm-hmm.
And I said that, Western cultures, global culture has hit a midlife crisis now. It has to go through a rite of passage into a whole new way of living and being. Otherwise, we're extinct. It's that critical. We're at a crossroad.
Yeah.
Someone described it as we're at a crossroad. We go one way, we'll go to hell on earth. If we go another way, we go to heaven on earth.
Mm.
It's that critical right now in our lifetime.
Yeah, we are absolutely at a choice point, a decision, a cross in the road. Yeah, what are you going to choose? Yeah. So please go on. Tell me more about your passion with the evolutionary mysticism.
Well, so after this, very spiritually aware childhood, but a very naive one, I suppose, in a way, and then going through that period of really, I remember one of my tutors at university saying the only viable, the only respectable position to take is agnosticism. You don't know, there could be a God, there might not be a God. And I thought that was totally clever. So I then called myself an agnostic, of course, but, very passionless. Actually, I love Jung on that again, actually, because he was asked, do you believe in God? He said, I don't believe, I know. And that's where we've got to move. And that's what I mean by mysticism, more than even spirituality, because spirituality has become a bit of a buzzword in that, it means you're not part of a religious institution, but you still believe in God and, you like to pray or whatever. Mysticism is more profound than that. It's awakening what I consider to be our birthright, each of us, as a mystic. That is with an ability to connect directly to the divine. Just realized I haven't turned off my phone, darling, which I'm going to do now. Here we go, gone. So where was I? So yes, so I went into this period of so-called agnosticism, but my PhD was all about religious beliefs. And I interviewed ex-Catholic dropouts to see why they'd rejected God. And I then compared their personalities and experience and perceptions with those who had converted to Catholicism from a non-religious background. They'd somehow found, I chose Catholicism because it's a more well-defined religious tradition in our culture. It's not as sort of airy-fairy as the Church of England or whatever. It has a very rich liturgical ritual tradition. So I was very moved by some of the converts I spoke to who had no emotional reason to convert to Catholicism. It wasn't as though they were falling about emotionally and needing a father figure or a mummy or whatever some of the others were. Some of them which had a really, really love-deprived childhood, and one could understand why they turned to Mary, the Mother of God, and God the Father, and so on. But some of them were just felt the Eucharist, felt the presence of Christ in that ritual, and who quite clearly had transformed their lives through that conversion, rather like a near-death experience or something like that, And I thought, gosh, that reminds me of something. I'm missing something here. And also I was the mother of 3 young boys, and I recognized that I was getting too tired and not giving enough to them. I was, binging on alcohol from time to time. I was smoking. I was taking Valium when I couldn't sleep. And I just recognized, I was falling, something was terribly wrong. I was in the wrong groove, I was an academic. I was living in the city. I was trying to be a perfect super mother and a super academic, super teacher. And my husband was away a lot, so I was more or less a single parent as well, because he was a journalist who went off overseas a lot. And I just realized I had to do something. So I started going to yoga classes. And I had this wonderful experience in the relaxation practice at the end of the class, called Yoga Nidra. And I'm sure many of your listeners will have heard by now of Yoga Nidra, because it's again become sort of mainstream. And you a voice with voice guidance, which is important. You surrender to the voice and work your awareness, your consciousness through your body a little bit at a time, letting go of tension. And you go ideally into this lovely floaty space where you feel yourself as a body of energy or a body of light. I began to feel that. And this was so gorgeous, I decided to train as a yoga teacher. Gosh, I'm going to learn more about this and share it with others. So that was the next step in my journey. Started that, and then I realized that academic life just wasn't suiting me. It was always making me tense, and I was teaching what other people had told me to teach rather than teaching what I felt or believed. And so I left academic life, I left my marriage, and I left city life, all sort of almost in one go as an inspiration. And I moved to the Blue Mountains with my 2 dogs, 2 cats, 3 boys, and started a whole new life. We had a goat, we had hens, we had a veggie garden, and I started to write what I was learning about the evolution of consciousness. I was reading Ken Wilber, tuning into people like Jean Houston, Matthew Fox, Joseph Campbell on mythology, all beautiful stuff that had been completely deprived of half my life, and I just felt, gosh, I've come back to where I'm meant to be. And I started actually taking classes informally, talking about the evolution of consciousness and these lovely writings. And then I was doing yoga classes, of course, and shiatsu to earn a very modest living. I was living on the poverty line, truly. Although I did have the money to buy a house, which was lovely. We had this gorgeous bush home. I felt so grateful for that, so great. And truly, Karen, when I made that step and went into a different way of living, I have never looked back.
Wow.
I've never needed a drink. I've never needed Valium. I've never needed a cigarette. I was just right there, like a fish being flung back into the ocean.
Beautiful.
Just wonderful. And the love I felt for my children and the delight they all were for me growing up and so on. But Yoga Nidra helped a lot. I do Yoga Nidra every single day.
I've got a fun story about Yoga Nidra. I have a girlfriend who's very busy in her mind and in her body, very busy, incredibly creative, and she's been doing yoga all her life. I suppose she's very spiritual, but she's one of those people that always said to me, "Oh, I wish I had that access that you have, that third eye access. I wish." Anyway, a mutual friend of ours died few years back, and she said that in her yoga class she loved the exercises, but the Yoga Nidra at the end was always like, oh, waste of time. She always felt like it was a waste of time, right? This was her attitude. And then one day she's doing her yoga class, and all she could think about was, I can't wait to the end. I can't wait to the end where we do the relaxation, the Yoga Nidra. I can't wait. And so that comes and she relaxes, and our dead friend appears in her third eye. And she says, and we all went to see John of God together, the 3 of us. So we all used to have spiritual conversation about all sorts of things. Yeah. And Marie, our dead friend, said to her, you know how easy it is to get to heaven? Let me show you how easy it is to get to heaven. And she reaches her hand out, and my friend, her name's Karen as well, in her Yoga Nidra, sort of extends her etheric hand up and grabs Marie, and she pulls her up, and she finds herself in this bliss.
Wow.
Just like in this heavenly experience as she's lying on the floor in the yoga studio, just completely like she's experiencing that energy of heaven. Yeah. And I'm telling the story, and I'm like, wow.
Yeah. Oh, it's a very powerful practice. And for people who find sitting, meditating, start to get backache, or what am I doing here? To begin by doing Yoga Nidra and getting that feel of being more, less physical and more etheric or ethereal, is a lovely way of getting into then the desire to sit up and have a more awake practice, because they are very different, lying down practice and sitting practice, I think. In my experience anyway, very different experiences. In that Yoga Nidra, you're on that threshold between waking and sleeping.
Right.
It's a very precious threshold, the hypnagogic state, That's why in Yoga Nidra, the resolution you make when you go into it, when you come out of it, is so powerful, because it's like a post-hypnotic suggestion. It's very transforming, especially if you stick to the same one for a while.
Yeah.
It eventuates.
But I totally agree with you when you say we're all turning into mystics. A mystic is no longer a special person. Like, everyone is becoming the mystic, and everyone is donning the vibration in a waking state of the Yoga Nidra vibration, to be waking meditation, to be always having that access to subtle dimensions or higher dimensions.
Well, darling, I live in a bubble a bit around that, and I suspect you do, because there are an awful lot of people out there who haven't got a bloody clue about any of it. Even You've come to my weekend residentials on evolutionary mysticism, and we do very deep practices for the whole day. I've had to institute silence on the first day completely because they just want to sit around and have cups of tea and talk about themselves. Oh God, we have to go in and meditate. Sort of thing. They're different by the time they leave, but yeah, there is a huge resistance to doing this inner stuff. That people like to talk and they like it, which is fine. It's a question of both, but once you've made that mystical connection that you're talking about with you and your beautiful people, it transforms your way of relating to the world and other people.
Absolutely.
It's not about separating the two. It's about enriching that connection with whatever you're doing. Your creativity, your relationships, your whole being gets changed by that inner connection with your own divinity, whatever you like to call it. I have to say I avoid the term God because it's far too much patriarchal baggage.
Patriarchal baggage. When you were talking about Catholicism, the Catholic Church has turned spirituality within the Catholic Church into an intellectual exercise. My next door neighbour used to work for the Catholic Diocese in Sydney. She had quite a high job there. And she has done every university degree that you can do, but the Catholicism has you do degree after degree after, they're university courses, and it's all an intellectual exercise.
All in the head, yeah.
It's all in the head. When the boyfriend breaks up with her, she's a mess. And I'm like, how are your degrees helping you in this moment? They're just not.
No. Mind you, at that stage, darling, we really must also make the point, however, that connection with the light and in our yoga nidra experiences, I think there has to be shadow work as well.
Right.
Otherwise it's so easy, and we've seen it so much in the New Age phenomenon.
Right. Mm-hmm.
The ego sabotages the mystical connection, and you get the phenomenon of spiritual narcissism, of spiritual bypassing, and people really, really serious and collecting dark energies because you're awakening yourself up to connection with weird sort of stuff that if you haven't cleared your emotional or the worst of your emotional body, you're in danger of ending up worse than you were.
Right.
So I do think there has to be a lot of perhaps more warning or understanding around it. This is why a tradition and a teacher in the early stages anyway of your mystical spiritual journey, I think is important. Like I was very blessed to have Samuel came at the right time and gave me what I needed at the time, and now I'm not dependent on that anymore. But there is a time when you need, I think, that guidance. And
Samuel was the Claire Vision School founder, Dr. Samuel Sagan.
Yes, Sagan. Yeah.
You met him in Australia in the 80s.
When he first came to Australia, to found the School of Esoteric Studies in the Western tradition.
Is he still on the planet?
Oh, no, unfortunately not. He died 2 or 3 years ago. Right. He was ready to leave. He'd given a huge outlook of books, of tapes, of cassettes, etc., and also trained a lot of people in his techniques, And the school is still thriving apparently in Sydney and over in America, where he eventually ended up in America.
Was he an Australian, was he?
No, he was French.
Oh, he was French.
Multilingual. He could speak French. He was fluent in Sanskrit. He was just a genius, a complete genius. And I adored him, and he was a really special person. But I never wanted, it's funny about me, I never wanted to get drawn into being one of his teachers or, I just avoided all that sort of training. Of course, he wanted me to be, but I guess part of it was emotional, darling, because I didn't want to fall at the feet of another male. It was a bit, I mean, there were other critiques of the school saying it was very masculine dominated. In that
right. Interesting. Yeah.
Which is unusual in a way, because most spiritual organizations are full of women. But, men were attracted to Samuel because he had that really strong, authentic masculinity.
Interesting.
But I wasn't ready to throw myself at his feet or become his right-hand person or whatever, or one of his teachers, because I felt I was getting sucked into something and I wanted to find myself was more important. He would not have argued. He would have said, well, that's what the teachings are helping you to do, my dear, but something in me resisted it. And I'm glad. Otherwise, I'd be a teacher of the Claire Vision School now, not where I am now. And I know where I am now is where I'm meant to be, put it that way. Something didn't feel.
When I was reading this in your bio this morning, or reading it in your story this morning, the Clair Vision School, because there are schools out there now called Clair Vision schools, which are teaching the kids to actually see through their third eye in the most profound way. Have you seen this? Like they put their masks on and then they read from books and they play sports. And when I say kids, they're teaching everyone, but they're calling themselves the Clair Vision School because they're literally...
I've heard of that, darling.
You haven't heard of that? They're literally teaching people to see through their third eye with their physical eyes closed, to the point where they can teach the blind to see. So and they're calling it the Clair Vision School. So when I saw that, I'm like, is this the same school? And I realized it's not the same school.
Probably not the same.
Yeah.
Some is to make it clear that it's not about clairvoyance. It's not about being able to see ghosts or spirits or whatever, which you probably can, but that's spiritual materialism. You don't get drawn into that. The aim of all the thing is to awaken your awareness of your mystical anatomy and connect with the self. Capital.
Yes. One of the
Buddha said, if you see the Buddha on the path, kill him, all of that.
Say that again. If you see the Buddha on the path, kill him.
Buddha's supposed to have said that. I don't know. It's a popular expression. If you see if you start to see, the Buddha, or just don't inflate the ego with it, is the best. The ego can very easily inflate it if you have a vision and you think, gosh, you're nearly there, you'll be holding fat bangs in no time. Come to me.
One of the most amazing people I've spoken to on the show, because I've been doing the show for quite a while now, about almost 12 years.
You're amazing, darling. You're amazing.
And I'm trying to find her name. Oh my gosh. I'll find her in a minute. But she speaks about this, that you speak about the subtle anatomy, the mystical anatomy, like I heard you talking on a TED Talk, talking about we have to not only look at the physical world, but the subtle world. Yeah. and learn the subtle anatomy. And her work, here she is, Desda Zuckerman. Have you ever heard of Desda Zuckerman? Oh, you have to see her work. It's amazing. And she's really one of those mystics that's out there teaching people about healing and the subtle anatomy. She's amazing.
Beautiful.
But tell me what you know about this.
About the mystical anatomy.
Mm-hmm.
But it's going to show that it's mentioned Eckhart Tolle, speaks of, what does he speak of? The emotional body or the pain body? The pain body. Well, I just understand that the East and West, we have this model of subtle bodies, where we have the physical body, and then you have the etheric body, which is the body worked on by acupuncture and not to extent martial arts and yoga, the flow of life force through your body to get that balance, and the etheric body then nurtures, the chi energy nurtures the physical body if it's flowing through all its necessary channels, so that's a very important thing to be aware. I think Yoga Nidra works a lot on that etheric layer of life force energy. But then you have the astral body, which has many different layers. We have the emotional, the intellectual, the emotional, and then you go into the higher astral, which is where you start to connect with the causal body, which is the body that reflects the divine. And, my understanding then is that, in our meditation practice, we are moving through these various layers, purifying them and finding our connection with the causal body, which is the closest we can become really to experiencing the infinite. But light comes in then. You feel this light, this beautiful sense of light connection above you, which you can then draw down into your heart and quicken the mystic heart, because this is where all the esoteric traditions say is the essence of your being, your divine being. It's this substance of the etheric heart, of the mystical heart, the mystic heart. I love that. And the organ of this amazing heart chakra, which when it starts to open and awaken, really becomes the center of your being, and your being becomes much larger than your physical body. But you mentioned the third eye, which is very interesting, because this was the primary technique of the Clair Vision School, is to find your meditation practice and this experience of your mystic heart by opening the inner gateway. This is the portal to the inner realms. We've always understood this. It's why the Buddha has the jewel on the forehead and so on. And it's just so sad that Western culture has closed it down for us, closes it down in our little ones through our education system and so on, because I'm sure it's lively as a child. And I guess mine was lively up until my university years, when I closed it down quite deliberately, just close it down. It's not real, and yet it's just this amazing gateway that when you feel that, and you can move inwards to a center in the center of the head, really, you express this as clearly as I can, darling. But what I've come to love through that awakening just a modest awakening. I think the awakening of the third eye is obviously not a yes or no. It's not such a switch. It's a tunnel for start going through the head and out the back. But it's a gradual process, just as the heart awakening is a gradual process. It's an infinite thing. The heart has an infinite capacity for love. We don't just suddenly, there it is and that's it. It's not like that at all. It's an ocean of love that opens up to you. So what I've loved in that, the most beautiful experience, well, no, that's not true, but one of the lovely experiences now for me is the sense of that central channel, the Sushumna. It goes down into the center of the earth. It's like a core of light and coming up through the perineum, up through the center of the body, in front of the spine, and out through the top of the head and up into the light. And, when you get emotionally upset or you feel you're losing it or whatever, just go back to that central channel. It's probably easier than going into the heart. It's such a stabilizing thing to feel you're centered in that axis of light, connects you below and above. And of course, the junction of the third eye and that central channel is a special point in the middle of the head. And then you connect with that, go down to the heart and awaken this extraordinary organ of the heart, which I think is our next stage in evolution. We have to come out of the head. The head has to stop being in control of the rational mind, and it has to be the servant of the heart intelligence. And that heart intelligence is connected to source, connected to oneness. It's when you begin to live in oneness and live in love. It's when you start to stabilize the heart energy. Does that make sense? That's my understanding now of the whole.
Oh, so beautiful. So beautiful. Just
it's so
sublime.
sad that people aren't exposed to that. They don't understand, they're not learnt, they have it all closed down. It's just, that's the greatest tragedy of our Western culture.
I want to see it taught in every school. I say this constantly on the shows, but I want to see everything you're talking about taught in every school and every university. I want to see the subtle anatomy, the mysticism anatomy are taught. Anyway, it will be one day. It will be one day.
Well, we have to see our way through. But all I'm saying, we're not going to get to a one day unless more people, aren't enough people on the planet who are creating an impetus towards a mystical renaissance, a mystical awakening.
You don't think there's enough people on the planet, did you say?
I don't think there are at the moment, but I think it's happening. I think it can happen. It would be enormously transforming. And I love Brian Swim in this. The cosmologist Brian Swim?
No.
Oh, gosh, he's another wonderful teacher. He's a science, he taught about the union of science and mysticism.
Brian Swim, is that S-W-I-M? Swim?
S-W-I-M-M-E.
M-M-E, okay. Brian Swim.
In my Consciousness of Catastrophe, I could devote a whole chapter to his teachings. He's looking at this journey of evolution from the emerging of the Big Bang, the flaring forth of energy through 13.8 billion years, ending up on our planet Earth with human species, with the consciousness able to reflect on all of that, which is extraordinary. The consciousness which is able to embody the divine eros, the energy that brought it all forth. So that's what he's turning it into, a mystical story, which is just beautiful. And the point he makes in terms of the evolution on planet Earth is that although various stages and big stages in the story, in the big story, the emergence of matter from light, the emergence of life from matter, one might say, on planet Earth, and then the emergence of human consciousness. But what he's saying is that the first unicellular organisms on planet Earth, the first intimations of a biosphere, which then took off across the planet, were just a few unicellular organisms who became multicellular organisms. Not all of them did, just a few of them did. And that set in motion the whole evolution of the biosphere on planet Earth. So if you like to translate that into us now, just requires a few of us to make that connection with the mystic heart and the divine to somehow, bring forth a whole new consciousness for humanity. I just like that little reminder. I think it's rather beautiful, don't you? Require everyone on the planet to suddenly have this. It just requires this.
There's a few narratives going on about what's going to happen. Some people are saying that Earth is going to split, and for those that don't go into the evolutionary, process, into the new Earth, they'll remain in that third dimensional consciousness. And then some people talk about critical mass, as you've spoken about. It only takes a small percentage of this to explode in the minds of humanity, and it explodes across the planet. So I don't know, there's a few narratives around what's going to happen in our future.
I think what is beautiful with what I was saying with Brian Swim is that it is cosmogenesis story, which You know what I mean? You know, this new globally uniting story as to where we've come from. You know, we're made from stardust sort of stuff. You know, that realizing of the power of evolution and the evolutionary impulse. And as far as what's actually going to be happening, darling, I don't think we know. I think we have to be enormously humble in our humanity.
I
because
think we're
we
creating
know everything. We thought we can control everything and control nature and blah, blah, we're totally in charge. That's been our great mistake. We're not. We have to flow in the current of the eternal Tao. We have to surrender to this greater intelligence and not think that our minds can figure out what on earth it's going to be like, because I don't think we can.
So, Gillian, do you think the greater intelligence also includes extra dimensional beings who are overseeing this planet, helping us?
I think, yes, absolutely. I mean, that's the other part of your mystic waiting, your mystical anatomy. You become much more aware of other realms and other beings.
Mm-hmm.
But, you know, again, we must not be careful not to get too transcendental in that, all of that. And remember that it really is about what we're doing here on earth.
Mm-hmm.
What I think is wonderful in the mystical renaissance that I feel that we're experiencing is that we're bringing spirit back into matter.
Mm.
You know, we withdrew spirit from matter. That's why we can destroy the forests and have the consciousness to do the terrible things we're doing to what is utterly sacred, which is this living earth, this living universe, and change our story around all of that.
Yes, I was listening to a guy speaking last night talking about the extra dimensional perspective and how they can, you know, travel across the cosmos at the speed of thought. That they said everything is God consciousness, that everything is consciousness, even the computer, even the chair you're sitting on, the table, the light, you know, it's all alive. And when you can communicate with the consciousness of everything, like that's what you're saying, we can communicate with the trees and the earth, but we can also communicate with the coffee table and the car.
I don't know about them being aware that they're conscious, but this is the thing that, you know, in the modernity we saw matter as being the basic substance of the universe, and consciousness just an epiphenomenon that came up accidentally. How stupid is that, you know? But now we're saying that consciousness is the prime substance, and the matter is an expression of that consciousness.
Exactly.
I'm now saying that to many scientists, and that's beautiful. That really is, you know, the new paradigm that has to, but it's hard because, I mean, I the analogy of, you know, when Copernicus came out with this understanding that the sun, not the earth, was the center of the universe, right back then. It must have been terribly difficult that the earth wasn't flat. Terribly difficult for people to get a handle on when they've been brought up with this completely different understanding. And I think it's terribly difficult for us to really feel into the reality of a living universe and a living planet, because we've been conditioned to think it's all dead. Right. Even if we were religious, we were conditioned to think it was all dead. You know, that's what our traditional religion told us.
Dominion. What does it say? Dominion over the earth and the animals.
Over the earth, which is there for our use, and we've taken up that, and we have just regarded it as just, you know, matter.
Yeah.
As I say, there's a lovely naturalist called David Abrams who talks to the materials of his building, you know, because he's so in love with nature and everything that comes out of nature. As we were saying, you know,
Have you heard of Richard Bach?
No.
Oh, he wrote Bridge Across Forever and Jonathan Livingston Seagull. And
of course I have heard of him. I know Jonathan Livingston Seagull. I'm not very good at remembering authors' names, but I remember, of course, beautiful. Yeah.
Yeah, he was the same. I had him on the show years ago. He was beautiful. He was saying that he was in love with his airplane. He's an ardent flyer. Yeah. And to him, they were like conscious beings, the planes, you know, they were his children, his babies, his family, until he crashed a light aircraft and he had a near-death experience. He said to me that he had a wall of books on near-death experiences. And then 2 weeks after I spoke to him, which was probably about 8 years ago, he had his own near-death experience. And I've reached out to him since then and said, do you want to talk about it yet? And he's like, nope.
Really?
One day before he leaves the planet, I'll get him to talk about it. But
because so many people do now talk about their near-death experiences, which is a lovely aspect of the mystical renaissance. People can now freely do that. And the transforming nature of that experience, you know, is the transforming nature of mystical experience. You don't have to die to have it. You can have it in your meditation practice.
Right. That's exactly it. You don't have to die to have it.
The light, they speak of the light. Yeah, well, fine, you know, sit every day and connect with the light. And it will transform your life. It will turn you into a different sense of being. But when you were talking about, loving everything, it reminded me of a Rumi quote where he says, you know, the mystic poet Rumi, wherever you are and whatever you're doing, be in love. It is really be in love with absolutely everything. The pillow you're lying on, the doona that's covering you.
We need to repeat that about 1 million times. Wherever you are, whatever you're doing,
be in love. In other words, love is not a feeling towards another person or a need, or when you speak of a need for love, love is a state of consciousness.
Absolutely.
Love is a way of being.
Love is your connection to the multiverse.
Yes, well, it's the connection to oneness. It's
everything.
Oneness is love. So it's the next stage of human evolution is to step out of the ego, the contracting me, mine, the skin encapsulated ego, as Alan Watts talked about it. Step out of that very contracting and consciousness that brings about really all our pain and suffering, and see ourselves and feel ourselves to be this oneness, which is love. And then all this, stuff falls away. But the snag there is that we're covered with layers, aren't we, of protectiveness, where we don't allow ourselves to feel that. It's our natural birthright, but we're clouded, whatever veiled or whatever, metaphor you want to use.
It's so funny.
That's where our spiritual work and our shadow work comes in to shed those things that hide the light. The light. Fear is a big one. Fear is a big one.
You're reading my thoughts. I was thinking about this morning before we got online. I was thinking about people in their near-death experiences and how they describe love as a love that they haven't experienced in their humanness. Exactly. Even when they got married or had children, it's a love beyond that love. Absolutely. And so having not had a near-death experience in that capacity, I was thinking this morning, have I ever touched that sort of love? Have I experienced that on earth? It's a question I don't know the answer to, because I don't know. I've only heard other people speak of that love. Have I met that love? I don't know.
I don't know. I think you'd know if you had, darling. And now, if you want to share, I have a very, very powerful experience of it.
Tell us, please share.
Is yearning. I haven't shared it. I don't share it, but I did write about it in the book. It seemed appropriate. I think it was after I'd been out in the desert and doing a lot of purification work and so on, and I came back. And I was I hadn't got this temple at that time. I was sitting in my house, in my bedroom, where I used to meditate every morning. In a state of meditation, obviously, the room started to fill with an enormous amount of light. And I was used to experiencing that to some extent, but this was really full on. And I heard an angelic choir singing, and it was something about whatever you do to me, you do to all my people, or something like that, quote from Christ, which I had to look up the following day. Anyhow, that aside, all that was happening, and my root chakra was vibrating, and my whole body of energy was vibrating, and my crown chakra was throbbing. And I felt this descent, tangible descent of, all I can say is the most exquisite quality of love. It was just pure love that I never even couldn't describe it. Just came down, touched my heart, quickened my heart, and then enveloped my whole body. And all I could do was cry. All I could do was sit there and weep at how I could have had any doubts about Christ, any doubts about, spirituality or anything, because it was so bloody real. And it stayed with me for a while, and then of course it lifted. Then the next day, the day after, I think for 3 or 4 days after, I had similar experiences of this descent of love, which seemed to permeate every cell in my body. And then, of course, I started to read the mystics and what this experience was. And a hymn from my childhood came to me, which I thought was lovely, one that I loved as a child, which said, "Spirit of my God descending, fill our hearts with heavenly joy. Love with every passion blended, pleasure that can never cloy. Thus provided, pardon guided, nothing can my peace destroy," or something like that. But it was this, and the descent, and in the Bible, it's the Holy Spirit is spoken of as a descent of love. But then the mystics talk about the heart, and the heart being the source of love and so on. But to me, it's been an experience of that heart awakening happening because of the light coming down into it. But what you were saying earlier, darling, is beautiful. And I haven't had the same exquisite experience of love to the same extent, but I know it's left a perfume in me. It's
perfume. Oh, I love that. So how do you, because with many people I've spoken to on the show that have had that same experience, you know, from an NDE or a spiritual transformative it's a moment, and it's not a lifetime. And then they try and evoke that. Well, how do you practice that in your life, you know, in your daily life, every moment,
I think in many strange, mysterious ways, it's a gift of grace. But I think, you know, as Sri Ramana or whatever, not Ramana Sri Ramaharshi, whatever, lovely quote from him where he said, the winds of grace are blowing everywhere now, but you have to raise your sails to catch them. You know, there is a sense in which we need to have our spiritual practice, whatever that may be, in order to become receptive to and open to that sort of experience of grace, which I'm sure is happening more and more across the planet. But to return to what you were saying about love, I love that, because the quality of this love, as I experienced, is as different as the caterpillar is from a butterfly. You know, from what we usually call love to what we're obviously capable of feeling and being, because we can become that love. There's an information of what we can become. Is that love? That is the love that is the fabric of the cosmos. It's the fabric of creation. It's there for us. If we could just, you know, and I had done a lot of purification work, it's true, and I was meditating, and I've been meditating through the third eye, etc. But I still think it was some sort of grace event, you know.
A remembrance. Like you say, we can become it, but I think we are it. We just don't remember that we are it. It's like like you say, we're covered in layers of doubt.
I don't know. Again, it comes down to just that humility to say, I really don't know. It was an experience, and it's given me insight and wisdom into what, you know, what evolution's about, in a way that we can. Yes, we can somehow. It's like that lovely quote from Teilhard de Chardin. Have you heard of him? What a great evolutionary pioneer!
What's his name? Say it.
Teilhard de Chardin, French paleontologist, lived the middle of the 20th century. But he was a Roman Catholic priest as well, and a scientist and a mystic. And one of the lovely things he said at that time was, humankind at this point in history has to turn to either worship or suicide.
Wow.
It's on the edge of either worship or suicide, which is a famous quote from him. But I don't know what I was going to quote from him a moment ago.
That's a good one. That's a good one. Well, as I was having this thought this morning, standing at the sink making a cup of tea or whatever, I was thinking, have I ever felt that love that they speak about? I might not have ever felt it, but I've definitely practiced being love. Like when I say practice, let go, not practice, but let go of all that interrupted the love that I am. Like let go of the unworthiness, the I'm not good enough, the I'm alone story, you know, all the stories.
Yes.
And as you let go of the stories, love tends to just permeate your whole being, and you can feel that love for anyone and everyone. Like I just fall in love. Yeah. People say to me, who's the favorite person you've had on the show? And I said, the last one, because I fall in love with them.
I love that. What you said to me this morning was that I'm totally in love with you, and I could so identify with that, because that's a special feeling. That's a special feeling. And I think it is true, as we were trying to say, whatever you're doing, wherever you are, be in love, because it is true that feeling of being in love with someone does give you an intimation of that exquisite divine love. It really does. And there's a lovely Buddhist practice, isn't there, which is beautiful, where you meditate, and you meditate on some being whom you love. It could be a pet rabbit, or, you know, your cat, or whatever.
Yeah.
Feel that love in your heart center, and then you visualize someone you're really not getting on with at the moment, having much problem, and you feel like same love for them, you know, and then you spread it out to the whole world, and it's a beautiful practice. And I'm sure it's giving you a taste, but that love I've described earlier is even it's a vibration or two above even that, you know. And I'm sure that it's limitless the way it can be so amazing. But it's so comforting to think that love is there, and it is the fabric of the cosmos. And it just requires us to, as you say, step out of all those layers of poor me and, you know, and blah, blah, blah. Yeah. And allow yourself to feel it.
Yeah. Allow it to be there. As I was thinking this thought this morning, it's funny, I never thought we'd talk about this, but it was just there before we came online. I was thinking, let me think if I can think of a time where I felt close to that love. And it was when I was reading the book's Conversation with God. There was some messages in the books that had me completely remember who I am and why I'm here. And I had this complete like breakdown of bawling, not from sadness, but from remembering. Like I don't even know how to explain it, but that was a sensational feeling that I've never felt before. And that was from reading a book. So I guess we can have spiritual experiences.
Oh, absolutely. Or walking in the park, or suddenly saying, I can't walk on the beach. Absolutely. These moments are there for us if we're open, if we're receptive. If
we're receptive, exactly.
I have a quote from William Blake. I'm very strong on quotes, aren't I?
You're doing well.
My book is full of them. William Blake, when he said, we are put on earth a little space to learn to bear the beam of love. And that resonated with me.
We're put on earth a little space to learn to
bear the beam of love. Because it can be so intense, it can burn you up. I mean, the mystics talk about it. It can be painful. It can. There's the mystic Llewellyn Vaughan Lee, the Sufi mystic. He's a lovely, lovely guy, Llewellyn Vaughan Lee. Tune into him on YouTube. Anyway, he speaks of some of his students or disciples going off and having MRI scans because they get such pain in the center of their chest when they start to feel this quickening of the heart chakra.
Oh, wow, yeah.
There's a sort of feeling that happens that can be mistaken for a heart attack.
I feel like the pain is the resistance to the love that's trying to burst through, and then you're holding it back.
Exactly. Exactly.
I remember this. I showcased a Tantra teacher in Sydney a few years back, and she had these videos of her using sexual energy to move energy through the body without touching the body, mind you. They were the most extraordinary videos. But she showed a video of a man having this therapy, and he was experiencing pleasure until he hit his heart chakra, right? And the energy hit his heart chakra. You should have seen his body, Gillian. His body contorted, and he looked like someone with cerebral palsy, and he was hitting his resistance to allowing love as the energy hit his chakra, and his body was just distorting, and he was screaming in pain, and all the men in the audience were like, they were freaking out because we saw one with a woman who was experiencing ecstasy, and then the poor man was experiencing this pain. Yeah. And then once there was something, when he started to cry, that's right, when he started to cry, that released whatever resistance, and his body completely relaxed. And then the energy moved through his body.
Darling, that's beautiful. Which
so
means
fascinating.
The Kundalini energy, we'll talk about that because that's another aspect. We've got the descending energy,
right.
We've got the ascending Kundalini energy. It's clearly awakening in our human race or whatever at the moment. A lot of people having, but again, if your body's not prepared for it or purified, it can be enormously destabilizing. It can be horrendous. People just can't cope with life,
Yeah. I'm thinking,
don't know what it's all about and don't have the teachings to understand what's happening to them. Yes.
Yeah, that's why we need to teach this stuff in every school. It needs to be number one practice, understanding not just our physical anatomy, but our subtle anatomies, and like you say, the Sushumna, Kundalini. We need to get this, anyway.
Spirit, absolutely.
Spirit one day. But how did you meet all the young ones from Yes and Festival? How did you get involved in that?
Oh, well, I had this gorgeous young man come to one of my weekends. Actually, the first thing was he'd heard me being interviewed about my book on the spirit of things in Rachel Kahn. And he rang me up, I think. And we talked about my book. And he's studying science at university. He's also an artist, a very talented young man. He was only about 23, I think, when he contacted me.
Is that Dan?
No, it's a guy called Will Swan, who was also talking about evolution of consciousness on that weekend. He gave a Swan. And he came up to one of my weekends, of course, with all these much older women. I remember picking him up at the station, and we just fell into each other's arms on this lovely connection. It's like meeting one of my grandchildren, really, or sons or something. And we got on famously, and we remained in touch. And he's one of the Yes and people. Yes. So he let them know about me, and then they caught up with me or read my book or something, and they invited me on, not just this year, but the year before or the year before that. I can't remember. I've been
nice.
And I've been a bit slack. I haven't been to all the follow-up things, but I think they're a lovely bunch of people. I was really impressed with them.
Yeah.
as really are caring about the planet and so on.
Absolutely. There's such passion in the younger generation for this evolutionary, move forward.
Yeah, but I love what you said about crying, because I thought that brought in me the importance of the way that grief can awaken the heart. We talk about the awakening of the heart. And that was a lovely story you gave of the guy who hit the heart and then had to grieve and cry and so on. And strangely enough, I think, COVID and climate change and so on, hopefully bringing more of humanity into a state of deep grieving. It's through that state of deep grieving that they will touch the energy of the heart. Have you heard of Joanna Macy? Joanna Macy's eco-spirituality. Oh, beautiful woman. Formerly Buddhist, but she doesn't call herself like me. She's a universal mystic, but also a scientist and an eco-spirit. She should call herself an eco-spirituality, whatever the word is would be for that.
Joanna Macy.
Joanna Macy.
Joanna Macy.
She speaks of when the heart breaks open, your heart can contain the whole world. She's got a lovely new book. I think it's called Coming to Life Again, where she's full of ritual practices to do with friends, with community, to awaken grief, to feel into the grief of the earth, to listen to the cry of the earth, and how that can open and awaken and lift your consciousness. Because there's a curious paradox. The deeper you go into grief, the more you can feel love and the more you can feel joy.
Yeah, that's so interesting. I've got a book series called the Awakening Soul book series, and in the first book it's called Awakened by Death, and one of the authors is a mother whose 5-year-old was shot in one of those American school shootings, the Sandy Hook. And she said her spiritual awakening was the grief. She said that her biggest fear had been realized.
Yeah.
And when she realized that her biggest fear had been realized, she realized she had actually no more fear anymore. And that was a spiritual awakening for her. And then she looked at her life and she saw how fear had run every thought. You put on makeup because are you good enough? Are you going to get early? Got to get the kids in time for school? Am I feeding them the right thing? Like every thought, there was this underlying bedrock of fear.
Yeah.
And as she experienced her biggest fear and in that deepest grief, she had this, she was like brought to the light. And then she started a movement, and now she's teaching consciousness in schools across the world. She's amazing.
What's her name?
Oh my God, I've gone blank. Her name is, I'll find it.
So you interviewed her as well, did you?
She's one of the authors in my book, and I've had her on the show a couple of times. I know her.
I'm sorry about my ignorance, darling. You've written a book too.
Oh, I've got a book series where I showcase people's stories in the book series.
Right. How wonderful. What beautiful work you've been doing, darling. I bow to you. Absolutely beautiful. Really lovely. And thank you so much for having me on. I'm really, really, really privileged. But what I was going to say about grief, there's a lovely story there. I heard one of the teachers speaking of this woman. I think it was in Africa. It was Bio. I don't know if you know him, but anyhow, he was talking about a woman in Africa who was always full of joy, always full of love and delight. And someone asked, how can you just be cheerful all the time? So many terrible things happening. Well, she said, I've learned to grieve deeply.
Wow. I've learned to grieve deeply.
But also there's a lovely quote from Joseph Campbell I like to share, which is that it's possible to participate joyfully in the sorrows of the world.
It's so interesting that you say that. We were talking about that on another show the other day, and somebody... Oh yeah, there's another show called, I'll introduce you to them, the Catman and Linda Coulter-Burge have a show called Third Eye Salon, and I'll introduce you to them. Yeah, and they interviewed me the other day, and Linda was quoting Joseph Campbell, and learn to participate joyfully in the sorrows of the world. That was the quote she was saying. It was so...
Yeah, which comes from heart awakening. Because you have that inner well of joy then that can sustain you no matter what's going on in the outside world. Doesn't mean you don't care about it, you grieve deeply, that's part of being human. But you have that sort of, it's a paradox really, but the joy. Because the esoteric traditions again tell us that the essence of the divine is joy.
Yeah.
They don't speak of love, it's joy, which is, I suppose, just the quality of that love that we were talking about earlier. It's nice to have our bubbles interacting, isn't it? You're in a sort of spiritual bubble and I'm in a spiritual bubble. We're exchanging bubble news or bubble people. Bubble mystics.
Bubble news. I love it. I am in a bubble, but like, that's just life, isn't it? Once you well and truly dive into this work, you just attract. You just brings you people that are doing the same thing. And I speak to so many people in the States with my groups that say, they join my groups because they feel so alone in their consciousness expanding journey or their spiritual journey or spiritual awakening.
Yes.
But as you start to really marinate in this work, it just attracts all these people into your life. Yeah.
I love that, marinate. That's a nice word. That's lovely, very, very lovely.
Well, I have to say, everyone has to read Gillian's books.
They need that. You need that nurturing. You need to have people around you. It's right in the early stages of your spiritual journey, mystical journey, to have people who are like-minded and so on. And often your family isn't. Your family can be incredible pullback to, normal sort of, stuff that isn't inspiring you anymore.
Absolutely.
Talking about real estate and food or whatever.
I finally found her name. The lady that had the profound awakening through grief was Scarlett Lewis, Nurturing Healing Love. Yeah, her 5-year-old left a message on the chalkboard before he went to school that day saying nurturing, healing, love in a 5-year-old's writing. And then he was shot during the Sandy Hook. And she was in communication with him afterlife. And she said that when she had this profound spiritual awakening through the grief process, she was in a state of grace for about 8 months, where there was no fear present in her mind at all. And she said during that time, that's when she mobilized and she got into like creating a movement. At the funeral, she thought about the shooter and she thought he was just a kid that was never taught to overcome his stressful thoughts. If we teach children how to overcome their stressful thoughts, won't we change the world? And that's when she started the movement. And now she has these consciousness, mindful practices that she has put into all these schools. She makes it a free download for schools to utilize. And it's very science-based so that the schools can get a handle on it. It's not too woo-woo, but she's teaching this, she's putting this into schools. And it's
well, there's a lot of that happening, I think, in America now into schools, as it is here in primary school anyway. But then when they get to secondary school, it's all this emphasis on HSC, on getting a bit of paper so you can get a job and money to buy stuff,
Yeah, exactly.
But that's absolutely gorgeous. Well, I wonder if Rick on Buddha at the Gas Pump has interviewed her. I'll check that out.
He probably has. She's pretty well known, I have to say. She's pretty out there. She's
what an unbelievable. It's when you look at the suffering in the world every day, and if you look at SBS New World News or whatever, and you see the refugees and you see the war zone areas and this incredible suffering that people are going through, it's just it's hard to run. We're so privileged. We're just so blessed. It's hard to feel into this that can be.
We definitely live in the lucky country, don't we? We're definitely.
We do, but we're going to be challenged too. We've already seen the bushfires and the floods, and the world is going to be different. And COVID, of course. But it's also interesting to see how it does change people's lives.
Yes.
Their values have changed.
Powerful.
They appreciate that they're still alive. And
absolutely.
So, there's some strange, mysterious, plan around it all. We have to believe that it's okay. If you're going to, I just wanted to share with you, I like to speak of us being in butterfly time.
Yeah, Crystal. Yes, please.
What I mean by that? Butterfly time. It is a popular metaphor now among us spiritual pilgrims or whatever we call ourselves, where the caterpillar in the chrysalis the immune system of the caterpillar attempts to destroy what are called the imaginal cells of the butterfly to begin with. Strong, it keeps destroying. Just as we murdered Christ and we murdered Luther, Martin Luther King was assassinated, Kennedy was assassinated, sages have been destroyed. We've killed off all these martyrs and all these wisdom people through our Western experience. So that's the caterpillar consciousness, killing off those who are attempting to move into a different level of being. But finally, enough of the imaginal cells are there to begin to bring into being the butterfly, which of course finally emerges. The caterpillar gives up and the butterfly lives off the mush of the caterpillar. So it's a lovely, lovely way of seeing our emergence at this time, the possibility that we're in that chrysalis, late chrysalis stage, and that we're about to birth into the butterfly. So that's a lovely image. But then the other butterfly image that I like too is from science, which science physics understands that when a system is in phase transition between either collapsing or moving into a higher, more complex state, it said it's in a phase transition, and the slightest input of energy can determine whether it moves to a greater complexity or completely collapses down. And it's called in chaos theory the butterfly effect. The fact that the butterfly's wings fluttering in South America can affect the weather in China. That's what they sort of say anyway, this, because of this tiny input can have repercussions and blah, 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 and affect the big picture. And that's another way of looking at where we're at the moment in our sense of calling to sacred activism, that we each have a gift to bring to this current crisis. We're each born with this gift that the world is waiting for, unique gift, which we feel when we're connected to our source. This is where sacred activism comes in, and that we're being called to not underestimate what we're capable of doing, just like that butterfly's wing, just a smile in the street. Tiny things can affect the outcome of the whole. So that's another butterfly effect, which I think is lovely. So butterflies,
Beautiful.
butterfly time.
I love it. Yeah. So everyone listening, watching this, just think of yourself as a butterfly as you flap your wings. Merging butterfly, making a difference across the world.
Fluttering of your wings can have an incredible impact beyond your possible imaginings. Because we're in transition. We're unstable, We are. We're in the mush. We're in the chrysalis, in the mush at the moment, aren't we? We are a bit, yes. The imaginal cells are struggling, but they're getting there. Yeah, we're imaginal cells in the mush. I don't know if that's a pleasing image or not, but anyway.
Here's a quote for you. I posted this on my timeline the other day from a gorgeous young spiritual teacher. He's an American. I think he's just turned 30. He says, the mind becomes quiet only once it sees that divine will is happening everywhere.
Yes.
I loved that.
Yes. Say that again.
The mind becomes quiet only once it sees that divine will is happening everywhere.
Oh, yes. That's transition from mind to heart, isn't it?
Yes. Aaron,
I love that. The mantras is not my will, but thy will be done. Not my will, but thy will be done. Yeah.
So when we see the chaos in the world, we think, oh, it's terrible. But, can we entertain that it's actually divine will? There's actually
all divine will.
All divine.
It's all the Tao, some way or other.
Yeah.
And we have to have the humility to realize that all we can do is follow our hearts, follow what, I have the expression feels right, do what feels right from that heart center. Don't listen to the rational mind. It hasn't got a clue most of the time.
It has its place.
I was listening to an Alaskan elder the other morning talking about his indigenous tradition and, of course, how they're struggling up there to preserve the wisdom of their elders and their tradition. And he was saying, our people, we always just understood what it was to be in the here and now and in the heart. We can't understand you people. We call you the reverse culture because you're all in your heads. You don't know about the heart. And that the head is just the servant of the heart. And spoke all the time about this heart energy, and their children were learnt that, and in their upbringing they learnt to tune into their hearts and so on. I thought, oh God, how amazing. That's true. We've just lost it,
A reverse culture. Isn't that interesting? I love that. The reverse culture.
There's a quote from Ram Dass on that. I'm sure you've heard of Ram Dass, the Zen guru. And he said that the intellect is the power tool of our separation. Could replace intellect with our rational mind, really. Our intellect is the power tool of our separation. The awakened heart is the gateway to our unity.
The awakened heart is the gateway to our unity.
The only way we can really connect with oneness and then just see everything as one.
Absolutely.
Contractions just fall away.
Well, darling one, you're an absolutely exquisite speaker. I so enjoyed listening to your TED Talk and reading your website and watching your videos. And I look forward to your talk at the Higher Self Expo. And I would imagine, having not read your books, unlike Rick, who you said that read the book and all he wanted to talk about was the book. I haven't read the book. I imagine they would be an absolutely sublime read because you're such an amazing writer. You just have
Sweet, darling.
You have a command of the English language. So,
Well, my academic years were not a waste of time entirely. Someone told me it was very useful. And they gave me that doctor too, which gives me, prestige in mainstream culture.
It does, doesn't it? We love a bit of a doctor, don't we? A doctor in something.
Otherwise, you're just some strange Sheila from Nimbin, possibly on drugs.
A strange Sheila
We're
from
going to listen to her.
I know, we put a doctor in front of her and then we'll listen. Oh, sit up and listen to the doctor.
Absolutely. She's got the right bit of paper. Yeah, yeah.
Oh,
But
Dr. Gillian, thank you so much.
Can I end with a quote from another wonderful evolutionary spirituality master, Sri Aurobindo? You've heard of Sri Aurobindo?
Yeah.
Aurobindo. And in his epic poem, Savriti, I love this particular verse because it's what we were talking about earlier about bringing spirit back into matter by feeling the living universe. And he's envisaging there what might be. And he says, then earth will become the home of heaven's light. Isn't that beautiful for a start? Earth will become the home of heaven's light. Nature's base and spirit's tops will draw near the secret of their separate truths and know each other as one deity. And spirit will look out through matter's gaze, and matter will reveal spirit's face. How about that?
Matter will reveal spirit's face.
In other words, we will see the divine
in everything.
Talk to the trees, and what we're talking about earlier, darling.
We'll see the divine in the car, in the computer, in the aeroplane,
because it's oneness.
Tree, yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
So that's the tantric tradition, of course, too. Tantric yoga, the rising of Kundalini, the immanent, the earth energy coming up and uniting with the transcendent, and then they marry in the heart.
Yeah.
The tantrism.
Well, thank you so much for all that you do in this world. You're a force. You're
very little, darling. Very little compared.
No. No, you're a force. I'll get you on some more shows. I introduce you to some more podcasters.
Oh, that would be lovely, darling. Very happy to sit here in the comfort of my temple and talk.
I know, easy.
That's being on the front line, is it?
We might even get you down to Sydney one day. You can talk to the tribe down here if you want to come.
You live in Sydney?
I live in Sydney.
Well, I do have family in Sydney. I occasionally make the journey down there. I just love to sit and have a cup of tea with you somewhere. Yeah.
Thank you again for being on the show.
Thank you, darling, for having me. Thank you very much. Don't you love my dark Madonna behind here?
I do.
Yeah. Our time, the dark Madonna. Absolutely. Symbol.
Isn't Gillian just so delightful? Oh, I loved meeting her. That was the first time I'd met her actually in person, even though we're not in person, we're on Zoom. Yeah, I knew that she'd be a lot of fun. I love that she was so irreverent about the whole doctor thing. That's hilarious. We make people that have doctorates and have doctors and letters after their name or before their name so important, and yet most of the people I speak with on the show have such amazing stories to share, and they don't have a degree in anything. I think we need to listen to each other's stories, as well as the learned people of university degrees. Beautiful. Anyway, she's delightful. I think I'm going to go up to where she lives and hang out with her one day, hopefully one day soon. Sorry, I just had a bit of brekkie before I did this part of the show. Yes, I'm not going to talk too much more. Remember to tune in to the Higher Self Expo and hear all the amazing speakers. I've been instrumental in finding Australian speakers that can bridge the world of spirituality and science, actually, to me, and I'm one of the speakers. There is no separation. They are one subject. And I think that science is discovering what spirituality has always known. And as we look more deeply into the way things work, we understand that it works the way the gurus have been saying it's worked for thousands of years. So it's interesting. Yeah, as I said to Gillian, I was listening to a man speak last night about the way that consciousness works with the way that ETs propel their ships, and that they understand that it's all one energy and you can communicate. It's all conscious. Everything is conscious. And you have this intimate communication with the vehicle that you're driving. Oh, anyway, it's such an exciting time. It's such an exciting, I can't wait until we discover more. Well, thanks again for watching and listening, and remember to like and subscribe and share the shows with your friends and all that good stuff. And yeah, sign up for the newsletter and go and sign up for the Higher Self Expo and all that. And if you want to join us in the Inner Sanctum, as I said last time, Aaron Abke, one of the people I quoted on the show today, will be joining us this month as our guest teacher, and I'm online teaching every week from my shows. I've had quite a few people that are coming into their channeling experiences. Some are already completely tapped in the Inner Sanctum. Some are just discovering it. Some are amazing healers, but they don't know it yet because they've got thoughts in the way, thinking, I can't do that. Once you get rid of those thoughts, you realize not only can I do all this stuff, I've been doing it, I've been teaching it for lifetimes. But it's an interesting crew in the Inner Sanctum. There's a variety of different people with different ideas about themselves, but we're all into all these things that I talk about on the show, and we discuss it and share ideas and share teachers and share recordings with each other, and it's great. I love it. I love my tribe, my little team in the Inner Sanctum. So if you want to join us, please do. And remember to check out the book, Awakened by Death. Love you big time. See you again soon. Bye for now.